Welcome to episode 7 of Rise of a Nation. This episode is on Honduras.
Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep into Honduran history today. It's a country with a past that's, well, let's just say full of surprises. Pirates, bananas, even a soccer war.
A soccer war. That's definitely not something you hear every day.
Right. We've got maps, historical accounts, legal documents, a whole treasure trove of sources. And we're going to uncover some of those hidden stories, really get a feel for how Honduras became the country it is today.
It's fascinating, you know. Honduras' history is so closely tied to everything that was happening in Central America. Wars, empires, unions, it all left its mark. We're going to trace that journey, starting way back with Spanish colonization and moving through some key moments, like that time Honduras was part of the Mexican Empire.
Hold on, Honduras was part of the Mexican Empire?
Oh, yeah, for a bit. And the Republic of Central America, too.
Wow. Okay, color me intrigued. So let's rewind the clock. First European contact, Christopher Columbus, 1502. Tell me about that.
He landed on the Bay Islands. It was just a decade after his first voyage, but European exploration and colonization just exploded after that, didn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how fast it all happened. And, it wasn't actually Columbus himself who met the Maya first, but his brother, Bartholomew. Apparently, he stumbled across a Mayan trading canoe. And let's just say the encounter wasn't exactly friendly.
You see that a lot, right? That initial encounter, that first taste of the power dynamics that would shape everything that followed. It was about resources, about dominance. And that really set the stage for a very complicated, often difficult relationship between the Spanish and the indigenous peoples.
And it wasn't just about trade. The Spanish quickly established their control, made Honduras a province within the Kingdom of Guatemala. And they kept moving the capital around, too. First Trujillo, then Comayagua, and finally settling on Tegucigalpa. Must have been searching for that perfect spot.
Each move tells a story, Trujillo, on the coast, perfect for trade, defense against those pesky pirates. Then Comayagua, more inland, good for administering the growing colony. And Tegucigalpa, nestled in all that silver. Mining became a huge part of the Honduran economy.
Speaking of pirates, didn't the Spanish build that fortress, Fortaleza de San Fernando de Omoa, to keep those swashbuckling raiders out? Imagine the stories those walls could tell.
It's a reminder of how important Honduras was, even back then. The Caribbean was this huge battleground for global powers, all those trade routes, and Honduras was right in the thick of it.
But it wasn't just the European powers fighting for control. The indigenous people resisted like crazy. That story of Lempira, the leader who united all those different groups to fight for their freedom, that's a powerful one.
He's a symbol of Honduran resilience, absolutely. A national hero. And he used what he had, guerrilla tactics, using the mountains to his advantage, fighting for years against a much larger, much better equipped enemy.
He sounds like a total badass. But sadly, his story ends in tragedy, right? Like so many who fight for freedom.
He was tricked and killed. It's a good reminder that history is usually written by the victors. It's on us to remember those who challenged power, even if they didn't win in the end.
It makes you think. But okay, fast forward to 1821. Centuries of Spanish rule, and Honduras finally declares independence. Can you hear the cheering?
It must have been a moment of pure joy, pure relief, but also the start of something totally new, something uncertain. And Honduras's independence, it was pretty short-lived. It quickly became part of the first Mexican Empire.
Wait, what? So they break free from Spain and then just become part of Mexico? Huh. Well, I did not see that coming.
It's one of those things that might seem strange now, but it makes sense when you think about it. Back then, national identities were still being formed. There's a lot of, I guess you could say, experimentation, trying to find their place in the world.
So how long did this Mexican chapter last?
Not too long, actually. From 1821 to 1823, just a couple of years.
Yeah.
But as we'll see, Honduras' quest to define itself, to find its place in Central America, that journey was far from over.
Okay, so the Mexican Empire thing was a pretty short chapter. What happened next? Did Honduras finally get its act together?
Well, not exactly. In 1823, they joined another union, this time the Federal Republic of Central America. It shows you, right? That dream of a united Central America, it just never really died out.
It's like they were constantly searching for that perfect fit, that place where they truly belonged. Was this Central American Republic any more successful?
There were definitely some attempts to make it work. Like in the 1840s and 50s, you had the Confederation of Central America trying to bring those states back together. And the Diet of Sonsonate, too, where all those Central American leaders got together trying to find some common ground.
So they were giving it their best shot. But, I mean, the Honduran flag still has those 5 stars, right? Representing the 5 states of that union, which, as we know, eventually fell apart. So what went wrong?
Internal divisions, mainly. Rivalries. It's tough, you know? Even when you share a history, even when you want that unity, those individual states, they had their own identities, their own interests. And sometimes they just clashed.
It's like a family, right?
Yeah.
Trying to make it work. But sometimes the differences just become too much. So all these shifting alliances, these unions that didn't last, how did Honduras end up with the borders it has today? That's got to be a story.
Oh, it is. And luckily, we have some great sources for this. Legal documents, mostly, from the early 1900s. And they show just how complicated those border disputes were. With Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua, everyone wanted their piece of the pie.
A real-life game of risk, huh? So what were the main things they were fighting over? Just land? Resources?
Well, there's this legal principle, uti possidetis juris. Imagine inheriting your grandparents' house, right? You get those property lines, even if they're a bit messy, even if your neighbor thinks part of the backyard is theirs. Uti possidetis juris, it's kind of like that. New nations, they got the borders that were in place during colonial times.
So basically they were stuck with these colonial airlines, even if it didn't make sense for the new countries.
Yeah, I can see how that would cause some problems. Exactly. Those old boundaries, they often ignored how people actually lived, where indigenous communities were, even natural features like rivers and mountains. It was a recipe for conflict, for sure.
Can you give me an example, like a specific case where this uti possidetis juris thing caused a real headache?
Well, take Honduras and Guatemala in the 1930s. Big disagreement over the Matago River, the one that flows into the Caribbean. Honduras said parts of it should belong to them, but Guatemala insisted they'd always controlled the river, and Omoa, that important port near the mouth of the river.
Control the port. Yeah, that definitely raises the stakes. Were there any other hot spots in this border tug of war?
Oh, yeah, for sure. The Valley of Copan was another one. Tons of Mayan ruins there, plus really fertile land. Honduras pointed to old documents saying it was part of Gracias de Dios, their province. But Guatemala, they had their own quorums, going way back.
It's crazy how these echoes of the past, they can just keep reverberating, shaping the present in such a powerful way. Did Honduras have similar issues with El Salvador and Nicaragua?
Yep. The border with El Salvador was always tense, especially around the Fonseca Gulf. Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, all three had coastlines there, important for fishing, for trade. But those boundaries, they were fuzzy. Lots of arguments over who could access what, who controlled what.
So it wasn't just land borders then, maritime boundaries too.
Exactly. And these weren't just abstract legal battles. The people living in those border areas, they were the ones who really felt it, caught in the middle. It makes you think, right, behind all those lines on a map, those are real people, real communities whose lives are being impacted by these disputes.
It's easy to forget that, that behind those lines on a map, there are real people dealing with the consequences of these border disputes. So did anyone ever try to, bring some peace to the situation? Find some solutions?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like with the Fonseca Gulf, for example. Honduras, El Salvador, and Nicaragua, they actually took their case to the International Court of Justice back in the 90s, trying to get some help sorting out those maritime boundaries.
So like an international referee? Did it work?
It helped, for sure. The court made some rulings, clarified some of those boundaries, brought a bit more stability, legally speaking. But, some tensions lingered. It's hard to completely erase those deeply rooted historical claims, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it sounds like finding a lasting solution to these border disputes, it's probably still an ongoing process. But I want to shift gears a bit, talk about modern Honduras. What were some of the key things happening, the big challenges they faced after those, pretty chaotic early years?
It's a good transition, actually, because as we move into the 20th century, you see Honduras trying to build a stable future while also dealing with the weight of its past. And one thing that really shaped the country, it was the rise of the banana industry.
Ah, yes. The banana republics. We talked about that a bit earlier, but it's worth diving into a bit more. How did that dependence on bananas, how did that affect Honduras?
Those big companies, the United Fruit Company, Standard Fruit Company, they had a huge impact. They controlled so much land, they had so much political power, they basically built the country's infrastructure. But a lot of times, it was more about their own profits than what was good for the Honduran people.
It sounds like a classic case of exploitation, doesn't it? Were there any attempts to push back against those companies?
Definitely. Labor movements started gaining traction, demanding better working conditions, fairer wages, basic rights. The 1954 banana workers' strike, that was a major turning point. It lasted for over 2 months, pretty much shut down the banana industry, forced the government and those companies to actually listen to the workers.
It's always inspiring, isn't it?
Oh.
Seeing people stand up for themselves, demand change, even when the odds are stacked against them. It really shows the spirit of the Honduran people. But it seems like challenges, both internal and external, they've been a constant in Honduras's history. We haven't even touched on the United States and how that relationship played out, especially in the later part of the 20th century.
Yeah, the U.S.'s role in Honduras is a whole other chapter. As the Cold War heated up, Honduras basically became a key piece in that whole chess game. The U.S. trying to contain communism in Central America, and Honduras was right in the middle of it.
So Honduras was kind of caught in the crossfire. How did that U.S. involvement actually play out? What did it look like on the ground?
Well, lots of things. Military aid, economic aid, but it often came with conditions. The U.S. supported certain regimes, even if those regimes, well, even if they weren't exactly democratic, even if their human rights record was questionable, as long as they were on the U.S.'s side in the Cold War.
Real politic in action, huh? Putting those strategic interests above everything else. Did this U.S. involvement lead to any actual conflicts?
In the 80s, yeah, Honduras became a base for the Contras, those fighters who were trying to overthrow the Sandinista government in Nicaragua.
Right.
The U.S. had military bases there, and Honduras got tangled up in all those regional conflicts that were happening at the time.
It's like history repeating itself, isn't it? Yeah. We see the same kind of thing happening today, those proxy wars, foreign intervention. It's never really gone away. But amidst all that political turmoil, there's one event in Honduras's history that just kind of stands out: the football war.
Ah, yes, the football war of 1969. Sounds crazy, right? But it was real. A series of football matches between Honduras and El Salvador, and those games, they actually triggered a real war.
I admit, that one's still hard to wrap my head around. Football, a game that's supposed to bring people together, and it starts a war. How does that even happen?
Well, there was already a lot of tension between the two countries, a lot of underlying issues like immigration and land reform. And those football matches, they just became a flashpoint. Every game, it was like the animosity just grew and grew. Riots, fans being mistreated. It was ugly. And it spilled over from the football field into politics.
Imagine trying to explain that war to someone who knew nothing about Earth. Like, yeah, these two countries, they went to war over a game. It really shows you, though, how something that seems small, something seemingly trivial, it can have huge consequences, especially when you've got those deeper social and political divisions just simmering beneath the surface.
Yeah, and even though it was a short war, that football war, it had a lasting impact on relations between Honduras and El Salvador. It's a good reminder, to be careful with those nationalist feelings, those passions. Things can escalate so quickly.
So from Spanish colonization to the football war, Honduras has seen it all, hasn't it? Where does that leave the country today? What's the legacy of all that history?
Well, Honduras is still working through a lot of those legacies: poverty, inequality, political instability, the effects of natural disasters like Hurricane Mitch. That was devastating.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that history isn't just something that happened in the past. It shapes the present in so many ways. But despite all those challenges, there's also this incredible resilience in Honduras, a determination to build a better future.
Absolutely. Honduras has a rich culture, amazing natural beauty, and the people are known for being incredibly warm and welcoming. And throughout their history, they've shown this incredible ability to adapt, to overcome those challenges, to keep striving for a more just and equitable society.
That's a great note to end on, I think. We've covered a lot of ground today, explored so many different aspects of Honduras's history, but there's always more to learn, always more to discover. Yeah. We encourage everyone listening, to keep digging, keep exploring, learn more about this fascinating country and its people.
And as you do, keep this question in mind, because I think it's an important one. Knowing everything we know now, knowing all the ups and downs, the conflicts, the triumphs, what do you think are the biggest challenges and opportunities for regional cooperation in Central America today?
It's something to think about, that's for sure. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Honduras's past. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching Episode 7 of Rise of a Nation. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe for more. Write in the comments what country's independence and expansion you would like me to cover next.